Hello, everyone. How is everyone doing this evening? Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Carol, and you're watching the Piedmont Trails channel. We're live tonight. We are live, and we're going to be talking about what caused our ancestors to migrate south during the 18th century. Primarily, I'll put some dates in there from 1750 to 1760, but we're going to be talking about various different reasons why our ancestors may have wanted to just pick up and just move south because there were a lot of families that did that, right? So say hi to me. Talk amongst yourselves on the live chat. Let me know you're here. You can ask me some questions. I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert on anything, but I'll be happy to help you in any way that I can. And I want to go ahead and announce our next live stream. And I want to go ahead and give you the date and what the topic is going to be about. And that date is going to be on September the 24th. It's on a Sunday. It'll be September the 24th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And our topic is going to be all about the colonial indentured servants. It's going to be information from our project. We started that back in January of 2020. And let me know, guys, if you can hear me okay. Let me know if you can hear me okay. All right. Um, but our next live stream will be everything about colonial indentured servants. And it will span over colonies of Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and portions of Georgia and New York and Massachusetts. Um, I think that'll be it. We are really going to share a lot of our information because next month for September, we're going to be concentrating on our projects. We're planning on releasing a map from our Great Wagon Road project and release that on our website. If you don't know our website address, it's piedmonttrails.com. If you've not heard of us and you're new to the live stream, please be sure to check us out and learn more about us. That's piedmonttrails.com. So September 24th will be the colonial indentured servants. That'll be our next live stream, okay? All right, we've got Janet says hi. Hi, Janet. And Elaine's here from Alabama. Welcome, Elaine. And Beverly's here. She's saying, Beverly says, hey to everybody. And Tyler's here. Hi, Carol. I've enjoyed all your videos and podcast episodes. I enjoy reading your blog posts as well. Thank you for all your work. Well, thank you so much, Tyler. I really appreciate your kind words. I really do. And T. Halbert says, hi from Virginia. Hello. And Cassandra says, hi, Carol, and everyone from Northern Indiana. Indiana, sound level is great. Thank you. Thank you, Cassandra, for letting me know. All right, we're going to get into it. And I'm going to just give you this is my goal for tonight. Because when we really got into the Great Wagon Road project, and we started studying different families and learning where they actually settled in North Carolina or South Carolina. They migrated south, but then we started tracing their steps back. And when we did that, we began to find different clues and hints that led us to where they originally departed from. Then we began to learn more about that immediate area. And we were able to, in many, many cases, learn who traveled with them. As I've often said, that these families, a great many of them traveled in groups. They didn't travel separately, they traveled in groups. And in some cases, we would find these families who traveled together, they would settle together where their destination was, whether it be along the Yadkin River in North Carolina or if they went further south into South Carolina. That it seemed like for a short period of time or longer, sometimes it lasted for generations, these families stuck together. So their past intertwines as you research back. And we began to discover different various reasons of why they may have migrated south. In some cases, we were definitely able to say, hey, this is why they left. In other cases, it seemed like something was happening in the area that they were originally living in that may have contributed to the reasons. And then other things happened too. So we weren't able to just kind of pinpoint down the exact reason, but we were able to pretty much form a case scenario of possible close reasons why they left. And it's a fascinating thing to learn because we want to know, well, what made them do this? It was a hard trip. It wasn't easy by any means. And it had to be planned ahead of time. Um, it's a good idea to know where they were headed to, but I think in doing our research, a lot of these families didn't know where they were actually heading to during this time. They were just heading in a direction, um, and just waiting to see what opportunities lay before them. I think a lot of families were like that. So what tonight's goal is, I want to give you different points to look at when you're researching your family and determining what their reasons were. And I want to give you different ideas to look into deeper. And cause when you really read about the Southern migration during the colonial period, the number one thing that pops up is land. Well, the reason why they left was land. And that's all good and fine. Land is one of the reasons why. But there is so much more to our ancestors in moving that far, from Pennsylvania down through Maryland, Virginia, and making that long, hard trip. There's a whole lot more to the story. That's what I'm trying to get to. And that's what I want to share with all of you and encourage you to research further in finding out those details. El Maria is here. I'm going to say hello to everybody. Hi from Winston-Salem. Oh, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, Forsyth County. Stuart Wilson. Hello, everyone from Burnsville, North Carolina. And March is from Mark H. Thank you so much for this channel. You're a great help all and very knowledgeable in family history. Thank you so much for your kind words. I greatly appreciate it. I really, really do. Okay, I'm going to throw some ideas at you guys, and then I'm going to stop every now and then and give you some little tidbits that maybe help you in understanding why I'm named some of these reasons for why our ancestors migrated south. And they're not in any particular order or anything like that. I just typically wrote them down for tonight's live stream. Number one was business opportunities. Business opportunities, colonial business opportunities, trade, occupation. How many of you know what your ancestor did for a living? Did he operate in a certain kind of trade? Was he a blacksmith, a weaver, a carpenter, a farmer, a planter? So could his occupation have a cabinet maker, clocks? Did he make clocks? I'm just thinking, and as I'm naming these occupations, the surnames are entering my head are the ones that I know traveled. So I think the occupation and their trade made a big difference on their decision and where they came from. Religious freedom. Do you know what religion that your ancestor family was involved with? Could that have made a difference? Was they migrating south because it was less populated in the southern colonies, which it was? And were they migrating south because of fewer towns and settlements, and it was had more potential of future growth than where they were currently residing? That's a possibility. Land, of course, prosperity, future plans. What about the French and Indian War during this time period? Did that have any influence on our ancestors in migrating south? What about better weather or climate change or landscape? Do you think that may have had a reason for them to migrate south? What is it possible that our ancestors were in debt and they were possibly running away from a debt in order to not, because they didn't have the means to pay it? Is that possible? Well, that would be a reason for them to migrate south. And what about slavery and indentured servitude? Maybe they were forced to have to migrate south. That would be another possible reason. When we talk about business opportunities and trade and occupation, I wrote down a couple of trades here, and I wrote a couple of names here too. Certain colonial trades were more adaptable in any location. than they were in others. Say, for instance, a blacksmith. You would need a blacksmith everywhere. And what about a weaver? How many of you had ancestors that were weavers? I found a particular gentleman who was a weaver who migrated south, but it seemed that over time, after he had settled in his North Carolina home, he became involved in other activities, which allowed him to become prosperous during his later years. So I found that, and I'm going to share his story too. But let's start with a blacksmith. I picked out a gentleman by the name of George Keller with his wife Anna, and they actually left Lancaster area, Pennsylvania, and they settled in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. And George Keller remained there until his death in 1788. He was a Lutheran by faith, okay? And he had actually sailed across the Atlantic to Pennsylvania in 1732. So we found notes by Reverend John Bartholomew Riger that tells us that George Keller was living in the Shenandoah area by 1740. So he arrives in Pennsylvania in 1732. He's already in Virginia by 1740. He was a blacksmith by trade. And in 1763, a debt was owed, and a small list of his tools are given: a sledgehammer, a chisel, 40 bushels of coal, and a pair of iron hopples. Now, I was curious, so I wanted to look up Mr. George Keller online and in certain books to see what I could find. And I did that this morning. And nothing mentioned it. It shows that he was a justice of the peace in the area of the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. It showed that he was of Lutheran faith in the area. It also showed that he served as an overseer for 2 roads that were located in that specific area. But nothing, and it also listed his wife's name and his children. His will and the probate date was listed. But nothing in there gave any description about his occupation. And think of how important Mr. Keller would have been to some of these families who are migrating just a few years later, migrating south through the Great Wagon Road. He's in the Shenandoah Valley, so he's more than likely on the Great Wagon Road or near it. So think of how important his occupation would have been. Do you think that would have caused Mr. Keller to stay put? Seeing all these families coming down and all that his trade, he's going to be profitable. All of these families are going to need his services. So instead of Mr. Keller migrating any further south, he stayed put. Would this have been the reason why? Because of his occupation? Would that have been part of it? And thank goodness for thank goodness for Reverend John Bartholomew Riger, and his last name is Rieger. I urge you to check out his journal and diaries. But thank goodness to his notes, because that's how we knew that he was a blacksmith. James Byrne was another blacksmith in the same area. In September of 1755, he was actually fined for 5 shillings for missing regular muster activity during the previous 12 months. So was migrating south to a less populated area, knowing possibly that communications were going in dire straits in Pennsylvania right before Braddock's expedition, and that the British Army was more prevalent in the area, and rumors of war escalating all throughout the area? Was this an enticement for families to move further south, leave Virginia, and maybe go further south? That's possible. Did they think if they went further into South Carolina, North Carolina, that the war may not affect them? I think it was like common knowledge that Ohio was a focal point. The French strategic targets were the focal point for the French and Indian War. So did maybe some of these families think if they were moving south that they would be farther away from the war that was approaching? Okay, let's go into to the weaver of John McConnell, and his last name is McConnell. John McConnell. He was a weaver by trade. He migrated to North Carolina from Virginia. In 1753, John and his wife Mary, they actually sell a tract of land in North Carolina to John Little for 20 pounds in Virginia currency. And why was it so important to pay in currency? There's a reason for that. In North Carolina, even though land was cheaper, you couldn't buy a piece of property for so many bushels of tobacco, even though tobacco was a currency in Virginia, a currency in most of the colonies in Maryland. But you couldn't buy land with that in North Carolina. You couldn't barter for a piece of land for that. Corn was also considered as currency, but you could not buy land in North Carolina with corn. So the stipulation about North Carolina and what I fail to see other people state is that, yes, land was cheaper in North Carolina, but the quick rents and the fees that came along with it had to be paid mostly in Virginia currency or real coin. They would not accept it any other way. So that means that the families traveling, migrating south, had to have real coin, or they had to have access to it if they were looking to purchase property. Okay, I'm going to read some of your comments. Mom's family came in through, this is the Jagger 4450, through Massachusetts in 1630, and Dad's family in 1636. 17th century. And part of the family migrated from Switzerland in 1737 to Saxe-Gotha. I had a Switzerland. Part of my family came from Switzerland in 1735, and they were in the Lehigh County, current Lehigh County, Pennsylvania area, Heidelberg Township. Part again, Kilgore settled mountain areas in North Carolina. Interesting. And then she goes, let's see, they go on to say Groom family migrated to Groomtown, North Carolina, south of Greensboro. They were tobacco farmers. My family migrated from Ashe County to Oklahoma. Wow, I live in Texas. I think, and I found this to be true too, and I want to stick this out there real quick. The families who migrated during the colonial period, we find the next generation or the next generation migrating elsewhere. And then you research those and you'll find that part of that next generation or the following generation migrated farther west. I can't tell you how many times I found that all throughout my family tree. And the last time one of my family members really migrated the longest was in Oklahoma, and during the big land rush. And she had actually kept a diary of that day, which is really wild to read. But I find that it's a trend. So is this something that was passed on from generation? Hey, if opportunities look better elsewhere, you need to pick up and go. That's what we did. That's what you need to think about doing too. So it's interesting. Okay, I'm going to get back to Mr. McConnell here. So he had just sold land. He sold a tract of land that he had just acquired in 1752. He just got this. He migrated in 1750, 1749. He got the property, and now he's selling it, a portion of it, in 1753 for 20 pounds of Virginia currency. Now, prior to this, John McConnell owned quick rent fees of 23 shillings, which is 23 shillings, that's a pound and 3 shillings. And he had actually owned for 587 acres. It appears, not saying this is why this happened, but it appears that John McConnell sells part of his land in order to pay his quick rent fees. Okay? What do you guys think? Do you see some of that happening in your family? In 1757, John assumes the responsibilities for 3 orphans. Their names are John, Thomas, and Robert Johnston. With them, with the taking the care of the orphans, he assumes their father's estate, which consists of 611 acres. In 1759, McConnell sells 627 acres to Moses Andres, who has just arrived from Cecil County, Maryland, in 1759. And he sells the property for 12 pounds of Virginia currency. 12 pounds. He sells 627 acres. McConnell has a large household at this time, which includes indentured servants. It includes the 3 orphans that I mentioned, and it includes his wife and his own children. I went further investigating him, and the indentured servant, one of the servants was a Dutch lady, a Dutch young lady. Her first name was Anne. Her last name was spelled Walhizin. And she was given 2 extra years of servitude for having a child out of wedlock. So in 1764, McConnell became guardian of his brother's children. Now he's taken in 3 orphans, and he owns indentured servants. He's got his own big family, and now he becomes the guardian of his brother's children because his brother Andrew dies suddenly. And so now he's responsible for Margaret, Agnes, John, Andrew, Mary, and Jane, which are his brother's children. This isn't all. So now the orphan Thomas Johnson, by 1770, he now is 11 years old and 5 months. And he becomes bound to John McConnell for 9 years and 7 months to learn the occupation of becoming a weaver. McConnell agrees to give him, at the end of his learning experience, to give him 1 horse saddle, 1 bridle, 1 loom, and gears associated to the trade. So when you look at John McConnell, you see him, he's migrated from Pennsylvania, and he's migrated to North Carolina. He does apply for several tracts of land in North Carolina. He has them surveyed. He fills out his application correctly. He pays for the surveys. When it comes time for the first set of quick rents to be paid, he sells off a portion of his land, it appears, in order to pay for his quick rents, because you had to have coin currency to pay for North Carolina quick rents. Then he takes the responsibility of orphans and his brother's children, and he's responsible for several tracts of land. So to me, it's not like he's just a weaver. That's my point that I'm trying to get across. He has become pretty prosperous as a landowner, and how the ways work in North Carolina. He's learned very quickly. I wanted to see if I had anything written about his for his will. No, but I did have this about his past. When I looked further into John McConnell's past, we find him living in Drew Moore, and that's Drumore, Drew Moore, Pennsylvania, with his father for a short period of time. His father is Alexander McConnell. And Alexander dies in 1750. I didn't write the date down, but I'm going by memory. I think 1753 or 1752. And he named his wife Mary as the executor of his estate. Now, if Mary, his wife, remarried, then the lands and the house and all the property and all the furnishings would go to the eldest son, Samuel. That's Alexander's eldest son, Samuel. Well, this left nothing for John McConnell. So there was nothing in Pennsylvania outside of, after his father's death, there would have been nothing there for him. Did this happen with your family? Were they the second eldest son? Were they the third, the fourth, or the baby of the family? Were they not the oldest son? Because in most cases, the oldest son, if living, inherited their father's estate. And so for John McConnell, he had to make his own mark in the world. And so he was taken a chance, or did he know ahead of time of what he was doing? See, these are where your questions go. But we know that he picked his small family up and he traveled all the distance from Drew Moore, Pennsylvania to Rowan County, North Carolina, and he settled there and he stayed and died and he became prosperous. He went through several ordeals, but overall, he became a landowner and he became prosperous and raised a large family. So that's one, and he was a weaver. He was a weaver. I'm just going to glance through your comments. I think some of y'all are talking to yourselves, which is great. Make new friends. Okay. Yes. All right. So trade and occupation. That's a biggie to look into. What about religious freedoms? You know, a lot of historians like to divide groups as migrating south. Oh, well, you know, you had a lot of Germans and Scots, and they made up the most popular or the largest group that traveled that migrated south. That's not true. You can't that's one sticky I don't like particular. You can't divide people into sections and say this is, you know, how they who traveled down the road. There were all types of people that traveled down the roads and migrated south. What's different about them is the reasons why. All types of people, all types. Was it religious freedoms? You had a lot of Quakers, but Quakers were prevalent in North Carolina since the 17th century. Did this entice other Quaker families from the middle colonies or northern colonies to migrate south. Here's another scenario. Was the Church of England in Virginia becoming too strict in certain areas? We found this to be true for some families. They would stay in Virginia for a while and then they would migrate further south. So was religious freedom a reason? What about if they had heard that, you know, there were more friendly native tribes that were in the area, or they were not so close to you? There were no native tribes left in the eastern portion of North Carolina and South Carolina. They were all mainly way over across the mountains. And what did people think? Did they think that that the lands were now easily available and there were no native tribes close to the area that would be a potential threat to them? Is this something that they could have heard or knew about? Was this part of the reasoning why they migrated south? And then, you know, for a lot of these families who migrated, you know, before 1760, then you had the Cherokee uprising, or what some people will refer to as the Cherokee War, where it attacked many settlers, and especially, I think the last attack was in February and March of 1760. So, and a lot of people and families, they lost their crops and homes and their lives. So I was just, you know, would that be one of the reasons why they migrated south, thinking it would be different? Less populated. Was that an enticement? Did they think like, okay, here's another scenario. Joseph Kerner was a German who arrived in Pennsylvania, and he later migrated south into North Carolina. He was already aware of the Moravians that were already there by the time he arrived, and so he settled in a little one of the Moravian communities of Friedberg. He was a clockmaker by trade, and if you've not studied Moravians, they love clocks, and Germans were very good at making clocks. But now his trade, he wasn't profitable in Friedberg. He had to follow the Moravians' rules. The Moravians, if you lived on any of their lands, you had to abide by their rules. If you were a business owner, or you were active in an open trade like this, or potter or a clockmaker, you cannot charge the prices that you wanted to charge. The church, the Moravian church, assigned the prices that you could charge for your items for sale. Then the church would take most of the profit. you were left with some of the profit, but you were not left with all the profit. The church got most of the profit. This enticed Joseph Kerner to move away from Friedberg years later, after he was able to locate land that he could afford, which was in Forsyth County, not far from Winston-Salem, near Kernersville. He's named, Joseph Kerner is named, that town is named after him. But that's just one scenario. He didn't remain there, but he was loyal to the faith. He remained loyal to the Moravian faith, but he no longer remained in the Moravian community. He left. Many families did that. So that's another scenario. Was the Moravians like a security line for some of these families who may not have had the means to purchase land right off, or didn't have the currency to pay for it? And were they sort of like a security line to maybe get their feet on the ground, so to speak, so they could get the money or get, the funds necessary and build themselves up and then later move? And breaking a brotherly agreement with the Moravians was not fun, by the way. Okay, land. I wanted to share with you about the land laws and how the quick rents, I specified that the quick rents in North Carolina had to be paid with currency. Well, also they varied from price to area to area. You would find someone paying far less than what a neighbor maybe 20 miles west or north would be paying. This really frustrated a lot of people, and they couldn't understand why. The land laws in North Carolina was just crazy. We looked up with 10,000 grants, land grants, Granville land grants, 10,000 between the years of 1750 and 1760 were issued in North Carolina. This doesn't count the land south of the Granville district, which would include Mecklenburg and Rocky River area and all along south. It doesn't even include those. This was the Granville district. 10,000 in a 10-year span. It's a lot of people. Yeah, a lot of people. Okay, what about the future plans? Were they planning on becoming landowners and then selling the land as a profit and then moving elsewhere, or maybe even returning back home where they came? Was that a possibility? What if they were looking to just become planners and getting out of their current trade or occupation? Say maybe they were a cobbler or they made shoes and it just wasn't very profitable where they were. And now they've decided, well, I'm going to be a farmer and I'm going to move south. I'll have all this land. If I need to sell portions of the land, I'll have that to rely on, and I'm going to farm. Here's another reason. Were people informed of the wide open meadows in the Piedmont area of North Carolina and in South Carolina, in the Piedmont area of South Carolina? No trees to pull up. Just wide open meadows with tall grass as high as the saddle on your horse. There were meadows in both Piedmont areas of North Carolina and South Carolina, but as we all know, there were many trees too. This was unsettled land for the most part, so there was a lot of having to clear the trees. But I just wonder, if you go back and you look through some of the advertisements, you'll see references to this, trying to bring people in. So were they really surprised when they got there and then they saw all these trees? Okay. It's a lot of work in starting a brand new farm, a lot of work. And then you get to the weather, where people with the humidity, like going around the southern part of South Carolina or into Georgia. South Carolina's primary crop was rice for years, and then there was a decline in that. Starting in the 1750s, tobacco was prosperous there and in North Carolina. Another note, if they were growing tobacco, say for instance in Maryland, tobacco prices drastically dropped 1752 to 1753. I mean, really dropped. So could it be that some of our families were living in Maryland and they were tobacco farmers and they lost? That would be like losing a whole year's crop if the prices dropped so low. Did that entice them to move elsewhere? Now, by 1755 and 1756, the Maryland tobacco crops prices went back up, but not back up to where they were. It took a little longer for them to go back up, but it was pretty devastating for those 2 years there. And also, a hurricane hit. I wrote that down in South Carolina. Yes, a hurricane hit in South Carolina in 1752 because I was looking for the quick rent books for 1753 and 1752 and 51, and you can't find them because a hurricane came in and just swooped them right out to sea. So they do not exist. If y'all know that they exist, let me know because I want to find them. So was weather, the humidity and weather, did that play a big part in it? And then, of course, then you got slavery and indentured servitude. Maybe they were forced to travel and didn't have a choice in the matter. And there were many who had to do that. You know, when you think of the native tribes in South Carolina and North Carolina during this decade, there wasn't very many of them left on the eastern side. And I looked for an exact number and I found like less than 400 living in the eastern side of North Carolina. So mainly what you had was the Catawba Nation and the Cherokee. And as far as when you go into Georgia, where the Creek Nation, they had already moved further west. So the Catawba was in fairly good communications with the settlers and everything, but not the Cherokee. And the more that the families migrated further west, then that's when the Cherokee conflict began to arise. And as a result, after smallpox took out most of the native tribes during the 1740 decade, then during the 1750, you had the settlers moving in and trying to move further west. And then the Cherokee War started. And then you had the Cherokee Treaty in 1761. But before that treaty, there were 20 villages that belonged to the Cherokee that were devastated. So their villages were burnt, their people were killed, and it was just total destruction. And then once the treaty was signed, then you had the more western expansion, more land. So that explains a little bit about what happened with the Cherokee. And the Catawba they slowly just kept retreating back, and retreating back. I think when I think of the Catawba, I like to think of them that they knew ahead of time. They knew in the back of their minds what was happening. They saw what was happening with the Cherokee. And yeah, so I think they knew the end result. They knew what that was going to be. Okay, so I'm just sharing ideas to get you guys to think and to look at different ways on how you can research on how to find out the reasons why your ancestors might have traveled south. Said, let's see, preachers tended to marry the daughters of wealthy. Well, I think during the colonial period, if any young man had caught the eye of a wealthy daughter, then he would probably desperately seek it out. I don't think he would pass that up. No, I don't think preachers would have fallen just in that category. I think that would have been everybody. Melissa Foster says, my family farmed cotton in Georgia, then Louisiana, then on to Texas. And my King and Took family, wow. And then Lord Granville controlled the top band of North Carolina and all grants inside the designated latitudes. Yeah, and then, McCullough, he owned a great big large portion that was south of the Granville district. And but when we looked through the land grants that were issued between that 10-year span of 1750 and 1760, it's over 10,000 of them, and that's just in the Granville district. Doesn't include south of that line. So you can pretty much bet just for North Carolina alone, over 20,000 land grants just in those 10 years alone. And I would wager to say even more. If I was to get the exact numbers, I would say it would even be even more. Doesn't include South Carolina at all. That's just North Carolina. Let's see. Nakota says it's horrible what was done to Native peoples. Well, yes. Um, Lots of things are horrible that happened in the past, and this is what I always say when, um, and I you have to be very careful on how you put things and make sure that you put them correctly. And I always try to do my very best to do that. Um, it was it was more like a war. It was, and you know, one side won and one side lost, and that's pretty basically what it all comes down to. And it's sad. It is sad, but we can't change it. So the best thing that we can do is to share the truth about our history, not to shy away from it, or or to say this was right or this was wrong, or just to state this is what happened, this is how it affected my family living a long time ago, and this is how it was a disadvantage to this portion of my family, because it affected all of our families in one way or another. Yes. um She says, oh, one says, I need to go to Raleigh and do some research. I hear ya. Elaine says, Carol, could you give me a source for finding the names of colonial soldiers who would have been at Braddock's defeat? Oh, yeah, I sure can. Elaine, here you go. Virginia's Colonial Soldiers. This is a really good book. I was looking for the Lloyd DeWitt Brockstruck, and wrote this book, and it was originally published in 1988. Also, there are rosters, and again, the name of that book is Virginia's Colonial Soldiers. There are also rosters and militia rosters that you can look up on the Library of Virginia, um, that participated in Braddock's defeat. Names, who they were, many were killed, and it'll tell you the end result of them. Let's see. B girl, I was raised in eastern North Carolina, first and several branches of my family settled in Byrne County. Yes, B girl, yes. She says that her family had migrated from Virginia and Maryland and Massachusetts. Originally, originally, way when we started the Great Wagon Road project, originally, my personal opinion was that majority of these people came from New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, and Maryland, who traveled down these major migration routes through Virginia: the Great Wagon Road, the Trader's Path, or otherwise known as the Fall Line Road, the Carolina Road, the Upper Road, Seven Islands Ford, Flower Gap Road, whichever the road. I always assumed that they came from the middle colonies, but there were been several after these through the years in researching. We have found a lot of families that came from Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and it's amazing because I can remember being in school, and saying, "Oh, the Germans and the Scots from Pennsylvania, they traveled down the Great Wagon Road." I don't remember what grade I was in. I think it was in seventh grade when I first heard about the Great Wagon Road. Um, and that's just always what you had heard. But it's amazing to find how many families came from northern colonies, even New York, and traveled south. It's amazing. Um, She said, I don't know if I'm saying your name correctly. It's Nekoti, Nakota. I have some confusion on my line whether they came in through Jamestown or Quaker migration. You'll need to trace your family steps back. And one of the best ways that I have found by doing this is researching thoroughly where they were and where you know for positive 110%, you know where they were and who they were, and start at that location, learn all about their friends and neighbors, everything that they do, and then work your way back. Because once you do that and you research all the immediate area of what you're positive of, it will offer clues and hints that guide you back. Believe me, it will. It will. You just, and this was, I shared this with a friend the other day. This is a good thing to remember. Genealogy and family history, patience. Patience is your friend. And sometimes you have to let the journey come to you. You can't force the journey on yourself. Sometimes you have to have patience and let the journey come to you, and let you soak in all the information that you can about all the different paths that are laid out before you so that you can choose the right one to go down and then pursue further. But yes, that would be my advice to you, as far as determining whether they came through Jamestown or Quaker migration. Okay. All right, I'm going to wrap things up. Now, remember, our next live stream is going to be September 24th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, and it's going to be all about the colonial indentured servants. We're going to be sharing a lot about information from our project, and that's what we're going to be concentrating all throughout September is our projects. Great Wagon Road Project and the Colonial Indentured Servants Project. I want to get the map up on the website for the Great Wagon Road, and I want to get that information uploaded on the website for our colonial indentured servants, because their names need to be remembered. We need to remember who they were, and we need to hear their stories. And there's some really fascinating stories that we want to share. So that's what we're going to do for September. That's our theme. We've set a theme for that. It's going to be the projects, Piedmont Trails Project theme. Those two, Great Wagon Road and Colonial Ditcher Servants Project. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining me this evening. I hope that I've kind of gave you some ideas about what to look for as far as trying to determine what made your ancestors migrate south. All kinds of different reasons, and there's a lot more reasons than what I gave to you tonight, but I hope that this kind of puts you on a track to where you might want to discover why, because it is amazing to find out their life stories and their details. That's what genealogy is all about. All right, thank you guys so much. I hope each and every one of you enjoy your journey to the past, and God bless.